The wheat fields were quiet in the early morning, the kind of silence that made even the crows hesitate before crying out. Dew clung to the stalks like 1,000 unspoken warnings, and the farmhouse at the edge of the land looked fragile against the wide sky, small, wooden, ordinary. Too ordinary for what lived inside it. Before the story goes any further, remember this. If you love powerful stories like this, stories that hit your chest and stay in your mind long after the screen goes dark, subscribe to our channel and share this with your friends. These stories survive only because you carry them forward. She was kneading dough when the first truck arrived. Mara wiped her hands on her apron and looked through the window. Dust rose in a slow, deliberate cloud, the kind made by men who weren't in a hurry and didn't expect resistance. 3 trucks, black, no plates. The engines idled like animals waiting to be unleashed. Her husband, Eli, was in the field, bent over the soil, unaware that his peaceful life was about to be tested by men who mistook quiet for weakness. Mara's face didn't change, not even slightly. She had buried that life years ago, buried it beneath soil, sweat, and the simple rhythm of planting and harvest. She had buried it beneath a wedding ring and a name no one recognized anymore. But burial didn't mean death. It only meant waiting. The knock on the door was loud, arrogant, meant to be heard across the land. When she opened it, 5 men stood there. Heavy boots, weapons carried openly, not raised, because they didn't think they needed to be. The one in front smiled like someone who had never been told no. "Farmer's wife," he said, eyes dragging over her face. "We're here for protection, money." Mara tilted her head. "We don't have money." The man laughed. "Everyone has something." Behind him, another man stepped forward, leaning close enough that she could smell oil and cheap tobacco. "Your husband's land sits on a very important route. Accidents happen out here. Fires, disappearances." She looked past them, toward the field, calculating distance, wind direction, the weight of the door, the sound the hinges would make if she slammed it. "I'll tell my husband," she said calmly. The leader's smile widened. "No need. We'll tell him ourselves. After we make sure you understand." His hand reached out and grabbed her wrist. That was the moment they crossed a line they didn't know existed. Mara didn't pull away. She didn't scream. She didn't beg. She simply twisted. The motion was small, efficient, precise. Bones shifted. Tendons failed. The man screamed as his wrist snapped, the sound sharp and sudden, cutting through the quiet field like a gunshot. Before the others could react, Mara stepped forward, drove her elbow into the leader's throat, and swept his legs out from under him. He hit the porch hard, gasping, eyes wide with confusion and fear. The remaining men froze. This was not how farmers' wives behaved. Mara stood over them, breathing steady, eyes cold. "Leave," she said. "Now." They didn't. One reached for his gun. He never finished. Mara moved, like she had never stopped being what she once was. She disarmed him, broke his arm against the doorframe, and used his body as cover when the next man fired. The shot went wild. Birds exploded into the sky. Within seconds, 2 men were down, one unconscious, one screaming, and the others were backing away, terror replacing confidence. "You made a mistake," Mara said softly. "And you brought it to my home." They ran. By the time Eli reached the house, alerted by the noise, the porch was empty except for bloodstains and broken pride. He stared at Mara, at the calm way she was washing her hands again. "What happened?" She met his eyes. "Nothing that won't come back." That night, Mara didn't sleep. She cleaned, she prepared, she opened the floorboard, beneath the bed, and pulled out the past, wrapped in oilcloth and silence. Weapons she had sworn never to touch again. Maps she had memorized once, when entire regions whispered her name like a curse. She had been a mercenary long before she was a wife, not a soldier, not a thug, a problem solver. They called her the Widowmaker back then, not because she killed indiscriminately, but because when she was sent, men did not come home. She had walked away when she met Eli, walked away because she wanted peace more than blood. But peace, she knew, was something you defended, not something you begged for. By morning, the trucks were back. This time they didn't knock. Gunfire shattered the windows, bullets tearing through wood and plaster. Eli was dragged from the field, beaten, thrown to the ground like a warning. Mara stepped outside slowly, hands raised. The men smiled again. Thought you were brave yesterday, the leader said, blood crusted at his mouth. Today you'll learn. She looked at Eli, broken and bleeding, and something old and terrible settled into her bones. You should have killed me yesterday, the man sneered. Mara lowered her hands. No, she said, you should have listened. What followed was not a fight, it was a lesson. Mara moved through them with terrifying clarity, using their numbers against them, turning weapons into liabilities. She knew where to strike to disable, where to strike to end. Every movement was memory, muscle, instinct. When it was over, the field was silent again, too silent. Eli stared at her, fear and awe colliding in his eyes. Who are you? She knelt beside him, touching his face gently. Someone who loves you enough to do this. But violence leaves ripples. Within days, word spread, not just among criminals, but among old contacts, old enemies, people who remembered the Widowmaker and realized she was alive. And they came. A regional syndicate sent hunters, professional killers, men who had survived wars and thought themselves untouchable. They surrounded the farm at dawn. This time Mara didn't wait. She led them into the fields, into the barn, into the woods she knew better than they ever could. Traps, ambushes, psychological warfare. She broke them piece by piece, not just physically, but mentally, making them question every shadow, every sound. One by one they fell. The final hunter found her at sunset, blade drawn, eyes respectful. They were right, he said. You're a legend. Mara stepped forward. Legends are just people who didn't die when they were supposed to. He attacked. He didn't win. When it was done, Mara burned the weapons, buried the bodies far from the land, and returned home. Eli waited for her on the porch. You could leave, he said quietly. I wouldn't stop you. She shook her head. This is my home. The syndicate never came again. Sometimes, at night, the wind moves through the wheat like whispers of the past. Mara listens, then goes back inside, back to the life she chose. Because the most dangerous people aren't the ones who seek violence. They're the ones who will unleash it only when everything they love is threatened. The night after the first attack did not end when the sun went down. It stretched, it watched, it waited. Mara sat at the kitchen table long after Eli had fallen into an exhausted, pain-filled sleep. The lamp above her flickered softly, throwing shadows across the walls, shadows that reminded her too much of other rooms, other nights. Other lives she had sworn were over. Her hands rested flat on the wood, steady, unmoving, but inside her chest something old had woken up and was stretching its claws. She had hoped it would never come to this. Outside, the wind whispered through the wheat, bending the stalks in slow waves. To anyone else, it would sound peaceful. To Mara, it sounded like movement, like footsteps, like men who knew how to wait. She rose silently and lifted the loose floorboard beneath the bed. The smell of oil and metal rose up, sharp and familiar. Her fingers brushed against cold steel, and memory surged like a flood breaking through a dam. She saw herself younger, harder, standing over maps stained with blood and dirt. She heard voices calling her name, not Mara, but the one she had buried. A name spoken only in fear. The Widowmaker. She closed her eyes for a moment, then opened them again. This is for protection, she whispered, not revenge. By dawn, she had already planned 10 different ways the next attack could come. It came before breakfast. The sound of engines shattered the calm, louder and more aggressive than before. Not trucks this time, motorcycles, fast, agile, hunters not thugs. Mara watched from the window as they fanned out around the property, disciplined, confident, professional. These men were different. Eli stepped beside her, pale but standing. They're back. Yes, Mara said quietly, but not for money. The front door exploded inward. Gunfire tore through the walls, splintering wood, ripping apart the quiet life she had built with her own hands. Eli shouted, but Mara had already pushed him down, dragging him toward the cellar. Stay here, she ordered. No matter what you hear, I can help. No, she said, her voice cutting through him like a blade. You survive. She shut the cellar door and turned. Her face was calm. Her eyes were no. She moved through the house like a ghost, using the walls, the angles, the spaces she knew better than any intruder ever could. A man burst through the hallway. She took him down silently, snapping his neck before his body hit the floor. Another followed. He got one step inside before the knife buried itself in his throat. Outside, the men realized something was wrong. They spread out. That was their second mistake. Mara didn't fight them head-on. She never had. She broke their formation, dragged them into confusion, made them chase shadows. A trap in the barn took two more, one impaled, one crushed beneath falling beams. The fields became a battlefield of fear. One man climbed onto the roof of the farmhouse, rifle raised. Mara saw the glint of the scope and rolled just as the bullet tore through the window. She sprinted, leapt, grabbed the ladder, and pulled herself up with terrifying speed. The man barely had time to turn before she drove the blade into his chest. She whispered in his ear as he fell, "You should have stayed away." When it was over, 7 men lay dead, but Mara knew better than to believe that was the end. That afternoon, an unmarked car arrived. One man stepped out, older, well-dressed, eyes sharp with recognition. He didn't carry a weapon. He didn't need to. He stood at the edge of the land and clapped slowly. "Well," he said, "it really is you." Mara faced him, blood drying on her hands. "You shouldn't be here. Neither should you," he replied. "You disappeared. People assumed you were dead." "I was," she said. "You just didn't bury me properly." The man smiled thinly. "The region is changing. New power, old debts. And you," he gestured to the bodies. "You're a problem." She stepped closer. "Leave. Tell them I want peace." He shook his head. "There is no peace for people like us." Mara's voice dropped. "Then tell them this. Farm is not territory. It's a grave." He studied her for a long moment, then turned back to his car. "They'll come with everything next time." "I know," she said. That night, Eli confronted her. "I saw what you did," he said, voice shaking. "I don't know who you were, but I know who you are now." She sat across from him, exhausted, stripped bare by truth. "I was paid to end wars quietly, to remove men who thought themselves untouchable. And now? Now I grow wheat," she said softly, "and I protect my home." He reached across the table and took her hand, even though it was still stained. "Then we face it together. Outside, far beyond the fields, plans were being made. Men with resources, with armies, with pride too big to swallow fear. They were gathering. And for the first time in years, the Widowmaker smiled. Not because she wanted blood, but because she knew exactly how to end this. If this chapter pulled you deeper into the story, subscribe to the channel and share it with your friends. The final chapter will change everything. The storm arrived before dawn, but it wasn't made of rain. It came on wheels, on boots, on whispered orders carried through earpieces and clenched teeth. The land around the farmhouse trembled under the weight of men who believed numbers made them invincible. Floodlights snapped on, cutting through the darkness, turning wheat fields into blinding white corridors of exposure. They had come with everything. Mara stood at the edge of the barn, breathing in the cold air, feeling the ground beneath her feet like an extension of her body. She had not slept. She had not needed to. Every second of the night had been spent preparing, rewiring paths, setting traps, choosing where blood would fall and where it would not. Inside the house, Eli waited with a rifle he barely knew how to use, his heart pounding hard enough to feel in his throat. He had argued with her. He had begged her to run. She had kissed his forehead and said, "If we run, they follow. If we stand, it ends." The loudspeaker crackled. "Mara," a voice echoed across the land. "Come out. This doesn't have to be ugly." She stepped forward, into the light, hands visible, face calm. "You're standing on my land," she said. Her voice carried effortlessly. "You have one chance to leave." Laughter rippled through the men. A figure stepped out from behind an armored vehicle, a commander, judging by the posture, the stillness. His eyes locked onto hers, sharp with calculation. "You killed a lot of valuable people," he said. "You embarrassed powerful men." Mara nodded. "They embarrassed themselves." He raised a hand, signaling his men to hold. "You were something once. A myth. But myths die." Mara's gaze hardened. "So do armies." The commander dropped his hand. The fields exploded into chaos. Gunfire erupted from every direction, but not from Mara. The first wave never saw her. Men fell into pits disguised beneath straw, impaled, trapped, screaming. Mines hidden along predicted routes detonated with brutal precision, not random destruction but controlled removal. Lights went dark one by one as power lines were severed. Confusion spread. Fear followed. Mara moved through it all like a shadow, striking from blind angles, never staying still long enough to be tracked. She used smoke, noise, silence, psychological warfare she had perfected long ago. She let them hear her footsteps sometimes, just enough to make them panic. Inside the house, Eli watched shapes move through the haze, heard screams cut short, felt terror and awe collide in his chest. This wasn't rage driving her. It was control. A squad breached the barn. They didn't come out. Another group flanked from the east. They ran straight into fire. The commander barked or "Durs," his voice cracking with disbelief as his forces dissolved into fragments. He had planned for resistance. He had not planned for her. By sunrise, the field was littered with abandoned weapons and broken men. The commander retreated toward his vehicle, bleeding, eyes wild. Mara stepped into his path. He raised his gun with shaking hands. "You could have ruled," he said. "You chose dirt and silence." She looked past him, toward the farmhouse, toward the life she had built with calloused hands and quiet mornings. "I chose peace," she said. "You chose to threaten it." He fired. She moved. The shot missed. Her blade did not. When it was over, she stood alone in the rising light, chest heaving, hands steady. The land was quiet again, but this time it felt final. Eli came running, dropping his rifle, pulling her into his arms. For a moment she let herself be held, let herself be human again. "It's over," he whispered. She nodded. "They won't come back." And they didn't. News traveled fast in the underworld, faster than bullets, faster than fear. One farm, one woman, an entire force erased. The name resurfaced in hushed voices, followed by a single warning: "Leave her alone." Weeks passed. The wheat grew tall again, the land healed. Mara returned the weapons to the earth, buried deep, sealed away. She washed the blood from her hands for the last time and planted seeds where men had fallen. Life resumed. But the legend remained, unspoken, unseen, but alive. Because the most dangerous people aren't those who seek power. They're the ones who abandon it until they're forced to reclaim it.